Story 1. I was incredibly passive-aggressive, and instead of simply asking questions for clarification or having tough discussions, I would punish my partners with the silent treatment or ghost them altogether. I was completely the toxic partner back then. Story 2. I was a jealous boyfriend in my youth. I didn't trust her or anyone around her. I judged what she wore, whom she hugged, and whom she talked to. Immature and toxic are appropriate words to describe the type of partner I was. Story 3. When my ex received a promotion, I was secretly resentful instead of happy for him. I started making snide comments about how he would probably meet someone better at work. My own insecurities turned me into someone who couldn't celebrate my partner's success. Story 4. I believe there have been times when I have valued my privacy and alone time in a relationship, crossing the line from healthy into selfishness and becoming somewhat alienating. Story 5. I have a bad habit of getting into a relationship with someone and then, after 3 to 4 months, completely losing interest and pulling away with no real reason. I end up ghosting people I match with, even though I dislike when it happens to me. Story 6. My first marriage falling apart was due to my lack of effort and not considering my partner nearly enough. She was a saint and didn't deserve my behavior. I owe her many apologies. She is no contact, and I won't try to interrupt her life. Story 7. I had a challenging time in relationships until my 30s. I struggled with many unresolved issues from my childhood, and I needed to understand why I felt and acted the way I did. Even now at 41, I feel like I've only been able to unpack these issues properly in the last few years with the help of an amazing psychiatrist. For a very long time, I had no role models for emotional intelligence, and it showed. Story 8. I was definitely the toxic one with my high school ex-boyfriend. Thankfully, I can laugh about it now, but I still cringe at how insecure I was. I was clingy and would call him repeatedly to find out where he was because I didn't trust him. I flirted with other guys but would lose my mind if he talked to another girl. It was crazy behavior. He wasn't perfect, but I was genuinely unwell. At 17, I had a lot of growing up to do, and I learned many lessons. It was an exhausting way to be in a relationship. Life is funny. Now, I'm so happy with my wonderful husband, whom I trust completely because I've learned that you either commit to trusting someone or drive yourself miserable by being constantly suspicious. My ex is now married to an amazing woman, and it's great to see how life can turn out. He actually cheated on me with his now wife, which was devastating at the time, but looking back, I find myself cheering them on. I know that sounds odd, but I see how cute they are together and what a wonderful family they have. It's clear in hindsight how wrong we were for each other. Finally, moving on from him was liberating, and I grew so much. It certainly helped that a few years later, I met someone who was a much better fit for me, and I learned to let go of what I can't control and just trust another person. Otherwise, you spend every day torturing yourself. Story 9. I reached a point where I would snap at any interaction with her and was extremely toxic in many ways. Probably the most toxic thing I did was putting holes in the walls of my mold-infested house. It took a lot of time and a lack of sleep to reach that point. Story 10. I could have turned into a stalker. Probably did for an afternoon. I was friends with this woman from work a decade or two ago. I saw hints that there could have been more text messages, pictures, I fell in love. It was only the second time in my life. Oh well, looking back, she dangled just enough of a carrot in front of me to keep me coming back. She would push me away, reel me back in, argue, and make up. This is something someone in their late 20s should recognize and walk away from. One day we were texting, and she was feeling down. I thought I would surprise her with some comfort food and come over to her place. She wasn't home and didn't respond to my texts anymore. I got angry and figured she might have been at a friend's place, so I used Google Street View to find out where she lived and went over there. On the way there, I realized how messed up it was for me to look up where she lived to demand to talk to someone I wasn't even official with, just workmates at best. I took a look at myself, didn't like how obsessed my behavior was, and walked away. I was and am very ashamed of that. Yet I am also glad I caught myself before it turned ugly. These days I am friendly with people, but I always keep a distance. I am alone, but not lonely. I am content with my life and where I am today. Story 11. I was insecure and carried a multitude of my own unresolved trauma into the relationship. I placed her on a pedestal, unknowingly objectifying her. I loved the way she made me feel instead of loving her for who she was. I overwhelmed her with affection, hoping she would be the one person in my life who would never leave me. The truth was, I didn't know how to love myself and, as a result, could never really love anyone until I learned how. My need for control over both our lives was unconscious. When she inevitably left, I continued trying to make things work because I had made her validation my entire world. Some of my greatest shame stems from my behavior during that time. It was a small blessing that she was on another continent. I now carry a sense of sympathy and understanding for those who break or stalk, despite knowing how wrong and harmful it is. I learned how easily one can stray from their ideals. If you can seek therapy, do it. The sooner, the better. Story 12. An upvote on this thread is for the bravery of admitting it. Voting is a flawed system in this case and others. Story 13. I got severely drunk in a new living situation after high school and confronted my girlfriend at the time over a minor disagreement. I didn't do anything except get in her face and yell, but the downstairs neighbors could hear everything and called the authorities. By the time the police arrived, I was on the couch crying and apologizing to my girlfriend, whom I was holding in my arms, when the police burst through the door and handcuffed me. I spent a long weekend in jail for underage drinking and fifth-degree domestic assault, but she refused to testify since I didn't hit her. Although I understand that assault can include threats of violence, we broke up shortly after. I don't get so drunk anymore. Story 14. I used to have unresolved childhood issues and would get drunk, causing terrible arguments with my exes because I believed I was unlovable and that everyone would hurt or cheat on me. It came out as anger and instability toward them instead. Thank goodness for therapy and healing. Story 15. Mine probably involves creating a fake persona and an entire story, complete with social media, texts, and emails to myself to make a guy jealous. Not my finest hour. Story 16. When I realized I was getting close to emotional affairs, I wasn't upfront with my partners about what was missing. Instead, I would try to pretend everything was okay, shower my partner with affection while resenting that they couldn't read my mind and reciprocate, and the relationships would implode. Story 17. I started an argument just to win it with screenshots I already had saved. I was playing chess while they were playing checkers. Story 18. I worry too much, which can be selfish and result in stepping over boundaries. It's not fair to them. I am trying to improve. Story 19. Recently, it has come to my attention that my approach to discussing my feelings about certain situations was not healthy. I had a lot of anger and frustration that I couldn't manage, and I took it out on my partner. This made it incredibly difficult for her to talk to me or be open. When she did try to communicate, I often struggled to listen and understand how to improve. Now, she wants time and space to see if we can reconnect naturally. I find myself wanting to have conversations and reassure her that I understand and that I have changed. I attempted to provide her with the life she desired, but I failed at some of the simplest and most important aspects. When I realized how damaging my behavior had been, it was like a switch flipped in my mind. I feel terrible for how I acted towards her. I genuinely believed she was toxic for a long time, only to realize that it was actually my own insecurities causing the issues. Story 20. I am not going to list all the things I have done, but I firmly believe in reaping what you sow. I have been toxic in all of my relationships, from cheating to lying to manipulating situations to get my way. It is important to reflect on your behavior and learn from it. Also, do not forget to forgive yourself and leave the pity party. Story 21. I pushed my husband many years ago, and the next day I started therapy. I grew up watching my parents fight physically, and we promised each other we would never be like that. 14 years later, we are still together. Therapy and anxiety medication helped a lot. Story 22. I had a one-night stand with this guy, but I wanted more. I used to sit outside his house and pretend I had been driving by. I stopped when I found out he had a girlfriend. Story 23. I have always said I am the common denominator in my failed relationships. There was one that was truly the bad guy, but I otherwise have a pretty good ability to choose partners. I just didn't have the self-awareness or maturity to show up in a healthy way. I took a long break from dating so I could get my life together and figure out why I was struggling in relationships. And I have come a long way. I think if more people took a moment to reflect on how they could have shown up better instead of getting caught up in demonizing the other person, we would all be much happier. Story 24. I assaulted my boyfriend at the time. I didn't realize that what I did was assault until years later. I was so obsessed with him. I thought he was incredible, beautiful, and attractive in many ways, and I pursued him intensely. It was a long-distance relationship, but I visited him and stayed at his house. He lived in his parents' basement. We were in his bed, intending just to sleep through the night together, and I was overwhelmed with desire for him. I wanted to have sex with him desperately, so I did. He tried to pull away and told me, no, but I got on top and proceeded anyway. The next morning, I made him drive us to Planned Parenthood for emergency contraception because I didn't use protection, and I told him a real man takes care of his partner. We need to go to Planned Parenthood as soon as possible. I had it in my mind that men always want sex, so I thought I was being confident and assertive by being dominant and staking my claim on him. I believed I was empowering myself. It was the most toxic relationship I've ever experienced, and it was all my fault. Assaulting him was the worst thing I did, but there were other actions I regret. The year we spent together brought out the worst in me. It took us 6 attempts to break up for good because I refused to let him go. It wasn't until I was out of the fog of obsession, with time and distance, that I realized what a monster I had been. I haven't spoken to him or heard about him since, and if he hates me, he would be justified in doing so. It is a sick irony that it wasn't until I was sexually assaulted a year later, felt horrible about it, that I recognized the parallels between what happened to me and what I did to him. Story 25. I was a workaholic, and it wasn't even a regular type of job. I did make some money from it, but not enough to justify the effort. It bled into everything. Sometimes he would hang out in my office while I worked just to spend time with me. I was not a good girlfriend during that time. He turned out to be difficult, but that time it was entirely my fault. I wasn't taking his needs into consideration or bothering with anniversaries or proper hangouts with mutual friends. It was just work around the clock, which was problematic because it was online. I could be social while working, but I was rarely fully present, and when I was exhausted. This went on for about a year and a half. I was often irritable and stressed because I had so many orders. I had to hire staff. It only really stopped when my health worsened, and then I had to stop working at 30. I haven't worked like that since. Now my main project is managing life with a chronic illness and a few other conditions, and for the past few years, I've been learning the craft of writing, not for publishing, just for myself. Story 26. Cheating. Long ago, I was cheated on by a couple of girlfriends, and I had a coworker who would tell tales and show photos of the women he was seeing behind his wife's back, along with others I knew who were having affairs. For no good reason other than that a woman was attracted to me, I started having sex with someone behind my then-girlfriend's back. I partly hated myself, but I rationalized it with a twisted thought. I've always been the good guy and suffered while everyone around me cheats and benefits from extra sex. It's my turn now. I cheated multiple times while maintaining a good guy image. I became skilled at gaslighting any suspicions, which added to my self-hatred. At least I was paranoid about pregnancies and diseases, so I always practiced safer sex. Eventually, the self-hatred overcame the entitlement. I quit cheating on girlfriends, sought therapy, came clean to my then partner, and adjusted my attitude. Years later, I am happily married. When I encounter an attractive woman, it doesn't go beyond a simple acknowledgement of seeing a pretty woman. It's been years since I've desired more from such interactions. Story 27. I would say my biggest mistake was trying to contort myself into what the other person wanted, then not being mature enough to recognize it, have a conversation about it, and work towards resolving the issue. Instead, it would just spiral into dishonesty and frustration. Story 28. It was my first real relationship, and I couldn't handle my emotions, especially when I was disappointed by his behavior. which led me to give him the silent treatment a few times. He did not deserve that, even though he did something wrong. I wish we had communicated better. I feel foolish and regretful now. I have decided not to repeat that behavior in my next relationship. Story 29. I could only love to a certain extent and never let anyone in. It was either my way or the highway. I chose to end everything. 2 months later, I realized that she truly loved me, but I couldn't reciprocate those feelings. I just don't have the capacity to love someone completely. Story 30. I was insecure to an almost psychotic degree because of my low self-image. I would cry and obsess over not feeling pretty enough and accuse him of not being attracted to me. I was almost constantly in crisis, so he would take care of me. I am much older now, and I cringe just thinking about it. My self-image issues and obsession with not liking the way I look haven't improved, but I've learned how to not make it other people's problem. Story 31. This question is challenging. I acknowledge that I am the one raising my hand. Unfortunately, I struggle with being toxic. Please understand that this is not a choice for me, nor do I enjoy it. I grapple with numerous mental health issues that contribute to my behavior, but I am not making excuses. If I shared the series of unfortunate events that have occurred since April 14th, you would likely understand my struggles. It is genuinely frustrating. Story 32. I was indecisive with my last partner. I would tell him one thing and do another. I would break up with him and then say I wanted him back. I was toxic to him, and when we finally ended the relationship, I had to reflect on how I did not treat him well. Story 33. He betrayed his best friend of over 20 years because he didn't think it was a problem that the guy was constantly flirting with me and trying to touch me, even after I begged him to help me get him to stop. Then I just left, moved to a new city, and changed all my contact information after I informed him. Story 34. One common trait among toxic individuals is the inability or unwillingness to recognize their own toxic behaviors. Anyone who admits to having toxic behaviors is taking a step in the right direction to address these issues and is working towards building healthy relationships. Story 35. I believe that toxicity can be reciprocal. Unless someone has a severe personality disorder, no one enters a relationship intending to be toxic. Sometimes we bring out the worst in others, and they bring out the worst in us. This mutual negativity can lead to a toxic relationship for both individuals. It is important to recognize and address one's own faults, preferably outside of the relationship. Toxicity often arises from unaddressed personal issues and trauma. Story 36. I was manipulating my partner's emotions when I was sad or my partner was upset with me. I was one of those, I can't do anything right people. My ex would be upset, and she would end up comforting me. We had one of those arguments after we broke up. Don't get me wrong. She had many issues and could be difficult. But when I called her manipulative and she showed me evidence, I understood her perspective. Now I handle things better. Story 37. I used to be extremely jealous and overly possessive, but I learned this trait from my ex-girlfriend. We were both just as bad as each other. Story 38. Before I turned 24, I was egotistical, appearance-driven, dishonest, and unfaithful. I behaved in harmful ways. Now, I am the exact opposite. I acknowledge my past toxicity. Story 39. It was one of those relationships where both people were toxic in their own unique way, but I was genuinely the much bigger problem. I don't want to list everything I've done because users are not therapists, but I was emotionally and physically abusive to him. I would constantly apologize and freak out, then end up doing it again. I don't want to use the justification of, I was so young, because that's not valid. For a few years after the breakup, I operated under the belief that he made me feel this way or made me do this, but that's not accurate either. That was the absolute worst version of me, and I haven't dated since. I really do not like myself. He didn't deserve any of that. All I had to do was leave like an adult. I try to heal and forgive myself, but I don't think I deserve that forgiveness. On a similar note, I genuinely think I should get assessed for borderline personality disorder. All the symptoms are there, but they tend to be present only in romantic relationships. I don't want to hurt anyone else, and I don't want to date ever again. Story 40. My partner and I just hit 12 years together. We are in a blissful place of healthy communication and stability and have been enjoying this comfortable situation for quite some time. However, it wasn't always like this. We faced significant communication issues, which turned out to be the core of every problem in our relationship. Essentially, I am loud, forward, and very blunt. Not in an unnecessarily mean way, but in the sense that I won't sugarcoat how someone's actions made me feel. He didn't know how to handle that. In many of his previous relationships, his opinion wasn't valued, so when I'd bring up an issue, he would retreat into silence, agree just to appease me, and change none of his behaviors or habits related to the issue. This was extremely counterproductive. Eventually, I became so pent up with frustration that even minor arguments would escalate. I inherited strong emotions from both sides of my family, loud, stubborn, easily triggered, and no one took the time to teach me how to manage these emotions. I was just shamed for feeling them. As a result, I had to teach myself to regulate my feelings in early adulthood. It was challenging, and the ways I behaved before were harmful. He could have left. I reacted strongly. I never threw things at him with the intent to hurt him. I can only recall one instance where I did throw something at him purposefully, and I feel immense shame thinking about it, especially since it occurred in front of my mother and her boyfriend at the time. One of the last times I threw anything was over 5 years ago. It was something that could have genuinely hurt him, and it almost did, completely unintentionally, as I was in a blind rage. I quickly regained my senses and started apologizing profusely, making sure he was okay. I told him that even though I was angry, he did not deserve such treatment, and I committed to making a conscious effort to change my behavior. The last time I threw anything was a few weeks after that. It was a roll of toilet paper that hit him square in the chest. The tension completely dissipated, and we both ended up laughing and discussing whatever was bothering us. It took time for us to reach our current state, but after that incident, I began to leave the apartment when I felt the shaky rage building. I would take a moment to get some fresh air and come back ready to talk. This marked significant progress on my part. Everything changed after I issued my last ultimatum. I had threatened to leave in the past, as the constant fighting had become exhausting, and after 7 years, I couldn't endure it any longer. He sensed that this was our last chance. I approached the conversation calmly and differently than before, highlighting the need for lasting change. Suddenly, he started opening up and actively participating in discussions about disagreements. We learned to compromise and reach calm conclusions within minutes instead of allowing trivial disputes to drag on for hours. 2 weeks into our newfound harmony, he hugged me tighter than ever, out of the blue, and confessed he would have made this change much sooner if he had known it would be this easy. It is important to reflect on oneself and one's behavior. It's alarming how blind we can become to our own misconduct or how quickly we try to justify it. I understand the intense and uncontrollable anger that led me to throw things, but it's crucial to gain control. We must be accountable for our mistakes to grow into better and more functional individuals. Story 41. I used to be extremely anxious, avoidant, distant, and closed off, often getting into arguments as a way to push my partner away. I was very emotionally detached from myself and didn't know if I was capable of loving anyone. I also disliked being touched. Now, years later, I'm not like that at all. I worked through my issues, and it wasn't easy, but I'm thankful I let my guard down. Honestly, I have healthier relationships with everyone in my life and can be there for people much more. My partner describes it as having golden retriever energy, and it turns out my love language is physical touch. The problem now is that I'm a bit insecure and often seek reassurance excessively. I can be somewhat codependent and tend to lean on him a lot when I'm feeling down, instead of dealing with my problems independently. In moderation, that's okay, but it can be overwhelming for him right now. I'm not proud of this, but we're all works in progress, and this is something I'll continue to work on. Story 42. My biggest problem in relationships is thinking that whenever a partner has a problem and their mood shifts, it must have something to do with me and my behavior. I tend to ask what's wrong and what I did, worrying that it could lead to an end because I messed up, instead of actually asking what that person might need from me in the moment and being there to support them or giving them some space. Anxious attachment is also challenging, and I am trying to work through it in therapy to form healthier connections. However, it doesn't help that I usually don't choose healthy partners initially. I'm still working on improving this, and I hope that one day I will find someone who is right for me. Story 43. Yes, It was my second relationship. It was a lovely and safe relationship. The only problem was the way his family treated me. I was from the wrong side of the tracks and was subject to their ridicule at every opportunity. The last straw came when they criticized my mother for being a renter in front of me. My boyfriend never stood up for me, not once. We spoke about it to several people outside his family. A friend even told him he needed to stand up to his family, who had also taunted him before I showed up. I let resentment fester, and I treated him poorly in the end. I went out one night with a friend without him and flirted with a guy, getting his number. I knew it was over before that night. The resentment had made me jaded, and I had lost my attraction to him. Everything he did turned me off. But I held on until after my sister's wedding because she had invited him. I broke up with him a few days after that. I did feel some guilt, but mostly, I felt like a weight had been lifted. In the week after, he expressed verbally that I had hurt him, but he continued to hold on and wanted me to apologize for us to get back together. I was not interested. So, a few months later, I ended up kissing an acquaintance of his at a bar in front of him. I did it so he'd hate me and leave me alone. It worked. I saw him years later when he asked my best friend to stay over at our apartment since we lived in the city, while he lived a few hours away. She asked me, and I begrudgingly agreed. He slept on our couch. At the time, my parrot was sick, and I was giving her medication 3 times a day. She slept in her cage in the lounge room, so I had to go out there and feed her while he pretended to sleep. We didn't say a word to each other. It was so awkward. I'm pretty sure he still hates me. Now, almost a few decades older, I know I should have just been honest with him. I should have told him why I had changed and why I was done with our relationship. I didn't need to hurt him on purpose. But I was foolish and had no idea how to have a healthy relationship. Story 44. I have relationship OCD that emerged during a difficult period when I experienced severe postpartum depression. Recognizing our weaknesses and sources of toxicity is the first step towards improvement. I sought help and received proper medication. Both aspects are manageable, but they require ongoing attention and personal growth. Unfortunately, I was not alone in the toxicity. Despite my efforts to break the cycle of codependency, it takes two, and my husband took too long to become aware of the situation. Story 45. I find that those who complain about their current relationship but do nothing to end it or fix it are the toxic ones. A few years ago, I picked up a passenger during a ride. Throughout the journey, he kept complaining and speaking negatively about his girlfriend, portraying her as utterly toxic. I told him, "Why not leave her if she's that terrible? I'd rather be happy and single than be with someone like that. Don't you agree?" He agreed and calmed down for a moment. However, a minute or two later, he went right back to complaining. Clearly, he is the toxic one. Story 46. I was definitely the toxic ex a couple of times. In my early 20s, I was reckless. Guys would confess their love for me, and I would think, "You have known me for only a week. Don't be foolish." The worse I acted, the more they would pursue me. Story 47. I was a toxic girlfriend in high school and college. I had a bunch of problems and insecurities. I hung out with people who were just as toxic. Instead of dealing with my issues, I treated my partners poorly. I started fights over nothing and didn't make an effort to have an actual connection with anyone. I slept around and damaged friendships because I couldn't see past my insecurities and self-confidence issues. Story 48. I need to be with him almost every day. I realize now that I should have been more understanding of his need for time apart. That's okay. I used to be obsessed with spending as much time with him as possible. I have grown a lot and haven't dated in a long time, but even in the brief dating I experienced, I was very different from how I was in my first relationship right out of high school. I've learned that people need space, and it's healthy for everyone. Story 49. I was emotionally immature, but I wasn't very aware of it at the time. I was also afraid of conflict and sometimes exhibited passive-aggressive behavior. I had unrealistic expectations for our age and the stages we were at in life. I used to get very upset with my partner for playing games, but upon reflection years later, I realized I was doing the same thing. Story 50. I was different with every partner. I sought attention and validation through deceit. I went to great lengths to get my fix. I had a wild temper and a jealous streak, despite being unfaithful myself. I struggled with significant, undiagnosed, and untreated mental illness, including post-traumatic stress disorder. I became violent when I lost my temper while drinking or when I was unable to access drugs, not towards my partners but towards others in their presence, which must have been terrifying to witness. I have gone through extensive therapy and am now heavily medicated. Today, I am a gentle, sober person who enjoys the outdoors and spending time with animals. I will never forget my past, and I mustn't, because if I do, I risk returning to where I started. Story 51. Oh yes, I am completely the toxic ex for every man I've ever dated. It took a therapist telling me that the way I date men is harmful to myself and maybe I'm not straight. I have behaved myself in every relationship with a woman since. I wouldn't dare to disrespect a woman I'm dating the way I did the guys. Looking back, all the guys were foolish anyway, so maybe I was karma for what they had done to girls previously. Story 52. Childhood neglect and abuse had a significant impact on me. It's difficult to believe that anyone could love me or want me around after being taught from a young age that I didn't matter. Story 53. I used to be very jealous. If my partner was talking to someone, I would automatically think that they wanted to be intimate with that person. I put my exes and my wife through so many pointless arguments over my own feelings of inadequacy. It took a lot of years to get past those emotions. Story 54. I had severely unmanaged borderline personality disorder with narcissistic personality disorder traits and would let my emotions control my actions before logic could ever be involved. I was also very codependent. I didn't know how to exist in a healthy relationship after so many traumatic experiences, so I created problems. I would lie, victimize myself, and start arguments, anything to get his attention. I would also become passive-aggressive at times instead of communicating. I am working on myself, though, and I will never let myself be that way again. Story 55. I had no self-esteem. His best friend insulted me, and he didn't defend me. I left without saying goodbye and shouted at them as I left. I sat in my car and cried for a while. Then I came back. They were both asleep, and I rubbed his neck until he woke up, and we cuddled and went back to sleep. I cringe when I think of that version of me. I feel sorry for her. Story 56. Silent treatment. Not because of malice, but I took the saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, a bit too literally. If I had said something, it would have suggested how she should or shouldn't do this, which I now recognize as mansplaining. At that time, I had the principle that ordering or telling a fellow human being what to do denies them their rightful humanity. The only reason I wasn't mansplaining and giving my partners the toxic silent treatment was that I wanted them to be the best human beings possible, even if I vehemently disagreed with them. I may have learned this from my parents, to be fair. These days, my wife has figured me out but still forgets, especially in the kitchen. When I try to keep busy with other errands, she gets stuck, exasperated, then turns to me and asks, "Okay, so how would you do this?" I tell her the first 3 steps I would take. She blinks, suddenly sees why, and asks, "Babe, why didn't you just tell me 5 minutes ago?" "Because you were close, and I didn't want to take that away from you. And you were watching me sweat and feel uneasy this whole time?" Some context. I am a mathematics educator, and most students who enroll in my classes dislike me. I know the reasons why, and I even contribute to them. The number of times, after the lecture part, when it's time to revisit and practice, I am asked a question and I respond with, "Which chapter are we on? Which section?" Turn to the start of it and look for a formula that has this on it. They always fume, but they do it. They suddenly get faster the more times I tell them to do it, and the few who understand by the end of the semester help their classmates find things. It's funny. When their classmates are helping them, they are angels. When I do it, I'm the devil incarnate. Story 57. Any disagreement felt like a personal attack. When she said, "I want you to plan more dates," I interpreted it as, "Why are you such a bad girlfriend? Why can't you take me out? What are you even doing for me? You are not good enough. I wish I never dated you." She never said those things. It all stemmed from my own insecurity, and I worked a lot on it. She deserved to have a better girlfriend, and I am sorry I couldn't be that for her. Story 58. I convinced my husband to open our marriage because I wanted our friend. I had a history with this friend and had never completely gotten over him. He was going through a divorce and was pursuing me. I wanted him desperately, but I love my husband and refused to cheat. So I brought up the subject of polyamory, and my husband agreed. He knew who I wanted and why, and he gave his blessing, though not his full approval. It turned out my friend was only interested in the fantasy and sneaking around. He didn't want me once it became a real possibility. I changed my marriage forever and destroyed a decade-long friendship out of lust and greed. Then I committed further. I didn't want to return to monogamy once I had experienced freedom, so I began dating other people. My husband and I are still practicing polyamory. It hasn't always been easy. There have been times when we almost didn't make it. However, we are going strong 3 years later, and things feel really good between us again. I acknowledged my mistakes, and he has also addressed his own toxic behaviors that created a rift between us. We are both better people for facing our issues and becoming brutally honest about our flaws. We are happy again. I do have a sister wife now, and honestly, that feels fair. Story 59. I was telling her she needed to stop certain habits early in the relationship. I didn't like her drinking every day and getting drunk every weekend. The vaping, smoking weed, and the constant unplanned outings were concerning. I could have handled it better. She was heavily medicated, and I truly believed the medication was making her unwell. She proposed breaking up, and I just ignored her last message. I think it hurt her. I didn't fight for it. Story 60. I was definitely toxic in my last relationship. The problem was that my ex was also toxic. My therapist wasn't a fan of my ex's controlling behavior. Story 61. I was verbally abusive a few years ago, around the ages of 16 to 18. I said the meanest and most hurtful things when I didn't get what I wanted, and others just wanted me to stop being angry and rude so they would do whatever I asked. I was the most disgusting person during that time. I experienced my karma a few months later when I met a different guy, and he treated me in a way that was 10 times worse. I learned quickly, apologized, and have been a better person since then. Some people just need to learn consequences, and I was one of those people. Story 62. I didn't go to therapy for my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and made her the source of my happiness because I craved to be loved. No one else should be responsible for your own happiness. Story 63. I am a really terrible person. I love my partner so much, but I treat her poorly. I have many excuses. A difficult childhood, a lack of affection from my mother, and other things. Yet, at the end of the day, this woman deserves to be far away from me. How can you say you love someone and then treat them so badly? Story 64. Passive-aggressive comments when I was upset instead of communicating like an adult. Allowing my insecurities to make decisions instead of my rational self. Allowing fantasies to build expectations instead of facing reality. Story 65. In my early 20s, I struggled with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder and treated my girlfriend poorly during that time because I was afraid she would cheat on me with her friend, whom she admitted to being in love with. She cheated on me with that friend, and I spent 10 years in therapy and on antidepressants. I am feeling much better now. Story 66. Fear of abandonment led me to do some regrettable things in the past, like going through his phone and emails. I was always looking for something to prove that I wasn't worthy of his affections. I was obsessive and compulsive about it, and I always felt terrible when I did it, but I just couldn't stop myself. Story 67. I often sighed in frustration during the first 2 months of dating my now ex when she would scream or accuse me of cheating while I was trying to understand what she was talking about amidst all the chaos. Story 68. I wasn't ready or capable of a relationship, so I would intentionally or subconsciously date emotionally unavailable men, leading to a cycle of disappointment. It took me years to realize that I had a part to play in those relationships and that I actively chose this pattern, even if I didn't realize it at the time. Story 69. I met my husband. I dated a guy for about 9 to 10 months and even met his parents for Thanksgiving, toward the middle or end of the relationship. After the holidays, I started to feel annoyed with the relationship and uncomfortable when he talked about us getting married and having children, even though we were only 21. My husband was in 2 of my classes during the second semester of our senior year in college and decided to pursue me, even though he knew from social media that I was dating someone. This was completely out of character for him, to the point that his roommate was surprised he went for it. Initially, I wanted nothing to do with him and was annoyed when he would sit next to me, ask me silly questions, or pop up at my usual reading spot before class. When we finally interacted outside of class, I asked if he knew I had a boyfriend. He acknowledged that he did and expressed a desire to hang out, so we went to lunch. I was fully transparent with my boyfriend about this and mentioned that I was spending time with him a few times over the course of about 2 months. My relationship outside of that was getting worse, and I had checked out, planning to break up after my boyfriend returned from spring break. My husband did not want to date me until after we had been broken up for a while. He said he did not want to hang out if we were going to be sneaking around with feelings for each other, even if we didn't act on them. I broke up with my boyfriend and started officially dating my husband about a month later. We have been married for 9 years in about a month and together for 14 years. It was a toxic situation, but I do not regret it. Story 70. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. Until that was diagnosed and treated far too late in life, I am positive I was the toxic one or, at the very least, attracted toxicity. Story 71. We were both toxic, but I arranged a threesome hoping she would transfer her neediness onto the guy instead of me. Story 72. I have a significant fear of abandonment. I don't know if it stems from my first love cheating and abusing me, but regardless, I still have feelings that I am never truly cared for and that I will be betrayed. This causes me to feel threatened easily and struggle with trust. I have been in therapy for a long time, but I don't know if I will ever truly get past it. Can make me harden and withdraw if I feel triggered, and sometimes it's just in my head. It is difficult. I try to understand it, but it can still feel like an elephant is sitting on my chest. It's incredibly lonely. Story 73. We weren't compatible, but instead of breaking up, I became very controlling, trying to get him to fit my idea of a good partner while we lived together. I had a detailed list of chores and cleaning duties specifically for him. I made him limit his time on the computer to encourage him to make real-life friends, not realizing that most of his friends were online, and that was okay. I forced him to try new foods and experiences, even though I knew they caused him a significant amount of anxiety. We broke up temporarily while still on the lease together, and when he asked me to try again, I made a list of demands that essentially asked him to completely change as a person. This man truly loved me, and he was willing to do anything for me, but I wasn't willing to accept him for who he was. Story 74. I have been difficult in relationships, exhibiting possessiveness, jealousy, and manipulation. I was desperate to be someone's priority and one and only. However, when I achieved that, I found it suffocating and struggled to cope. I spent a significant amount of time in therapy and continue to work on self-improvement. I can proudly say that I am much better and more secure now, and my relationship is thriving. I am finding balance and calm in my life, which I never had before. Although there is still work to be done, I like myself much more than I ever have. I make a point of learning from every situation, whether about myself or others, which I believe is very important. Story 75. I was a difficult ex-girlfriend because I avoided my then-boyfriend due to my fear of relationships and commitment issues. When he questioned me, I responded cluelessly to avoid confrontation. I still have commitment issues, but now I don't put others through them and simply avoid relationships altogether. It's not healthy, but at least no one is suffering because of it. Story 76. I was thinking about this earlier when reading a post about what you would say to yourself 10 years ago if you had only 3 words. Mine would be don't marry him. Not because he is toxic, but because I am. I am a terrible partner, and he doesn't deserve to put up with the difficulties I create in our lives and the impact of my actions on our family. Story 77. Yes, my first relationship was intense. I was completely in love with her, but I was so afraid of doing something wrong and losing her that I ended up pushing her away. I then resented her for it. I had some mental health challenges at the time, which definitely contributed to the situation, but I can't place all the blame there. At times, I just wasn't a nice person. I believe I have improved, and I am certainly less selfish now. Story 78. I have been in only 3 serious relationships prior to my current one. In the last 2, my partner was the toxic one, and in the first, there wasn't a toxic influence. However, I can admit that I was definitely toxic in some ways in those 2 relationships. Mostly, I struggled with setting boundaries. I communicated them well but was terrible at enforcing them, and I became very angry when those boundaries were violated. I had an anger management problem with those 2 partners in particular. When I felt unheard over time, I essentially threw adult temper tantrums. I simply didn't know how to manage my anger. The biggest toxic trait I have, though, is not knowing when to walk away. When things are bad, I tend to make every effort to hold on because it was good once. I know that this statement is often viewed as being overly dramatic, as if it's not really that bad. But I assure you that knowing when to walk away to avoid further hurt is beneficial for both parties in a relationship. Begging to hold on when there's nothing left to hold on to is detrimental and, indeed, toxic for both individuals involved. Story 79. I am overly jealous and clingy. I didn't like not having his full attention when we were together, and I would get sulky and pouty. I broke up with him because I realized his best friend, who is now his girlfriend, made him smile more. Story 80. I purposely made myself look like I was uninterested because I couldn't trust that they would really like me if I tried. They ended up needing space and slept with someone. Story 81. My way out. It was the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Our political views had diverged. On the day of the breakup, my ex was supposed to leave for Germany. 15 minutes before leaving my house, I gave him a nootropic substance for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which included a medication. Already at the border, he was caught under the influence, issued a large fine, and banned from leaving the country. It was deserved. He was a bad person, but I was even worse. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.